Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first session of Team 4 Evaluating Advisory Services, Extension Programs, Innovation Support. I would like to thank you, the authors of the 3 papers that will be presented shortly, and all the participants for being here. I'm not familiar with the open platform, so I hope everything goes well and that there are no technical issues. Since there are only 3 papers, we have enough time. So authors can take about 15-20 minutes for their presentation. After each presentation, we will have a round of questions. I invite all the participants to write questions in the chat during their presentation. If there is some time left over, we will open the discussion at the end of the 3 presentation. So I give the floor to the first presentation, which focuses on the construction of an analytical framework for the definition of effective learning environments. The title is Developing an Analytical Framework to Identify Barriers and Success Factors for IPM Demonstration Networks and Learning Environments. So I invite Laura Triste to open the microphone and make a very short presentation of herself and the co-authors.
I don't know if the others hear it too, but there seems to be an echo where there's a dubbing of Patrizia with a half a minute behind. I don't know if there's somebody else who has this problem. And now I hear myself again. So I hear myself twice, but it's quite annoying, actually. I don't know how to switch it off. Okay.
Sorry, Laura, if you could exit out maybe of the live stream. I'm not sure if you're in the live stream. If you could exit out of that, it might help.
I'm in the live stream, yes.
Yeah, if you exit out of the live stream and just stay in the backstage version here. So just make sure you open on this tab.
Okay. Yes, okay. I think it's okay now. Thank you, Perfect. Andrew. Okay, I'm sorry, everybody. So welcome, everybody. I'm Laura Triste from ILVO, from the Institute for Agriculture, Fisheries and Food Research in Flanders in Belgium. I'm here to present a paper that we developed in the IPM Works, or for the IPM Works project that recently started in October last year. And we did try to develop an analytical framework to identify barriers and success factors for IPM demonstration networks as learning environments. So I bet a lot of you recognize the situation. You organize a learning activity for farmers, but you're not sure whether it reaches the intended outcomes, which is the learning and the adoption of more sustainable farming practices by farmers. So yeah, you could wonder which factors of the learning activity impact the intended outcome and how should they be designed. And this is exactly what we aim to do in the IPM Works project. Let me shortly introduce it. So IPM Works aims to stimulate the adoption of holistic IPM by proving that it works. And the main way that we will do this in IPM Works is to focus on peer-to-peer learning. So there will be 2 main activities, or big activities that are organized. So on the left side, you can see that there will be set up some IPM demonstration hubs in different countries. So they are regional and they consist of 10 to 15 farmers. They are clustered in sectors. So you have for example, horticulture, orchards, so there are vineyards, so there are different types of sectors. And these hubs, they are clustered in a network. And within these hubs, the farmers will test some integrated pest management practices and strategies. And the knowledge exchange between these hubs within these hubs are facilitated by a hub coach. And then on the other hand, you have demonstrations of success stories from these hubs, but to a wider public. So not only to the farmers that are in these hubs, but also to the wider range of farmers or maybe other actors that are interested. So the project description makes a little bit clear that there will be a lot of different types of learning activities in the project. I listed here a couple of them. So there will be group discussions in these hubs. There will be on-farm demonstrations for wider publics. There will be presentations from farm advisors. There could be some one-on-one advice between the hub coaches who will be advisors and the farmers. There will be some peer-to-peer, farmer-to-farmer exchanges during a field walk. There will be some trainings organized by researchers and advisors, and there will be some reflection exercises on what they did the past year. So there's a whole lot of range of learning activities. And so how can we then define the learning activities in such an IPM demonstration network? So we decided to search for a concept that is able to take the width of all these learning activities. So we found the concept of learning environment. It comes from educational science, and it was introduced to show as an alternative for classroom, because students can learn in a lot of other places or environments than a classroom. And we found a suitable definition in the UNESCO document, which defines the learning environment as a complete physical, social, and pedagogical context in which learning is intended to occur. And then we also, because there's already a lot of literature on demonstration networks, integrated pest management networks, farmer field schools, peer-to-peer learning. So we also took a look in this literature and tried to merge those two sources of literature. So the definition of the learning environment and then the information or knowledge that we already have from the other literature on networking and farmer field schools. So we identified 4 different elements in the for the framework. So first, the learning objective, because this will define how the other 3 elements will have to be shaped or what will be effective. Then the physical learning space, the pedagogical context, and the social context. So I'll go through these 4 elements. So the first one is the learning objective. And in IPM Works, this is something that I would like to stress. So the aim is of this learning environment in IPM Works is to develop the necessary competencies of the farmers who participate to implement a holistic IPM approach on their farm in the long term. So in contrast to the what they call a single step IPM approach, where only one specific IPM method is implemented or tested. The aim of the project is to look at the farming system, the whole farming system, and to have this holistic IPM approach on the whole farm. So not only one practice, but different types of a combination of different types of practices. So, and a question could be how does this influence the learning activities that are taking place? How do they have to be different from, for example, one practice that you want to teach to a farmer or educate to a farmer, or having this holistic and systemic approach? And then in the hubs, there will also be defined learning objectives within the hub. So what do they want to reach within the hub? This will be done together with the farmers, because also literature says that it's It's more effective if you do it like this. And also for the farmers themselves, there will be some learning objectives defined. Then the physical learning space, we defined the location, of course. So where exactly is the learning taking place? Literature shows that on the participants' farm is one of the most effective and most wanted places by farmers. But also, if there is quite some time between the physical meetings, short virtual meetings could also be already very helpful for short check-ins, whether everybody's in line with what he's wanting to do, whether there are some questions or troubles. This came out of literature. And also to have some sensory experiences, to have an authentic learning space, so on a real farm, where people can really see what's happening in real life, and also to have these embodied learning, so people can really experience what is happening, can see, feel, hear what is happening, and this enriches their learning experience. Then also the other participants are shaping this physical learning space. And this will be defined by, for example, participant characteristics, because they will define the dynamics in the group, but also the presence or the absence of other types of actors that are in there. For example, I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit too fast, because also other actors might influence the dynamics within a group. For example, the presence of policymakers, for example, can influence how farmers will act and what they will say in a group. And then, of course, a facilitator. I think the keynote speaker already mentioned it. The role of the advisor in facilitating this knowledge exchange is really important. So his skills, but also the continuity of having the same facilitator to building the trust seems to be very important. Then the pedagogical context. So we defined some learning approaches. So which methods or approaches are used for the learning of the farmers. So it could be discussion groups, demonstrations, seminars, experiments, could be a bunch of them. Then also some specific learning tools can be used. This could be benchmarking tools, evaluation sheets, decision support systems, and other types of tools that help the learning process of the farmers or to reflect. Then also some room for evaluation and reflection. In the case of IPM work, this will be the assessment of the effectiveness of different IPM strategies that they have tested, but also reflection on the outcomes, what these IPM strategies help them, but also going wider, not only focusing directly on the pest management, but also, for example, on economic, what does it mean for labor, so all these type things. Then the participation, engagement, and ownership, the interaction and hierarchy, and social capital and trust, they all also have a big influence on this pedagogical context, because the motivation to participate also defines the dynamics, how willing people are to learn, how effective the learning will be, and farmers should be in charge of their own learning process, so they can define their objectives themselves, can steer what steps there will be taken. Also, the equality and the openness is very important. Equality between the hub coach or the facilitator or the advisor or a researcher, if he's involved, and the farmer. So everybody's on equal basis, and the openness between everybody. And then the social capital, which is focused on building social ties and building a sense of community, which again fosters the reflection and sharing of experiences. Then the social context is actually the wider context surrounding of the learning environment. So you have the organizational and funding structure. This can influence the learning activities. Then you also have legislation, which is conducive or could be also contracting to the learning objectives you have set. But then you also have the wider community and the ACES, For example, the attitudes towards integrated pest management for this project of other people in the sector could be influencing how willing farmers are to participate and to engage with what they have learned, but also the other actors in the, for example, the agri-food chain can stimulate or influence this. So in conclusion, so we use this concept of learning environment to capture influencing factors in the IPM demonstration networks, to increase the adoption of these holistic IPM strategies. We link the learning objective to the physical, pedagogical, and social contexts. And we are validating this framework currently, right now at this moment, in the IPM Works project. So we use this framework as a basis for setting up an interview guideline, and we interviewed facilitators of different types of demonstration networks and IPM networks in Europe. And we will adapt or maybe adjust this framework based on what we find here. But so far, it seems quite capturing the main elements, but it will help us to specify where we have to dig deeper. So going back to my starting picture, this is the learning space, and we identified some of the, based on the framework that we built, we identified some of the key elements in here that can help to pinpoint what is contributing to the learning and the effective learning, and hopefully also the adoption by farmers of sustainable farming practices, or IPM in this case. Maybe since there is some room for discussion, I also added 2 questions that might be interesting here, and that are some things that we maybe will dig deeper in the IPM Works project. Is, for example, how does the education or extension of a holistic or advanced IPM differ from the single step IPM? So these single practice IPM measures that you want to educate them in. And also, how do different learning activities contribute to the different steps in the learning and adoption of IPM practices? So if you would have some interesting literature on this, or we would be very happy to hear it from you. Thank you.
Many thanks, Laura, for your interesting presentation. And so let's move now on to the question. Please, I invite if there are any questions from the audience, I invite all people who are watching us to make their question for Laura. I have a lot of questions. This is a new project, an interesting project. So I would like to know how many countries are involved in this project, and if there are some learning, language issues with these countries. So when and how you address these issues?
Yes, there are, I think, 17, I'm not sure, but I think 17 countries. All the hubs are still setting up now, so we haven't been enrolling this in practice, but I'm also involved in the Nefertiti project, which is a little bit similar. It's also networks of demonstration farms that are set up. So within the hubs, it's regional, so there shouldn't be a language issue. But for example, for cross visits, we hear that this language issue is much bigger, and there we use advisors that translates in the meantime to farmers. Or in some countries, there was a simultaneous translation. For example, I participated in one in Poland, and then everybody had ears like this and a device, and there was a translator translating constantly. So this was really nice, because then you had you could see what they were doing and immediately hearing it. But I don't know if there is a budget for everybody to do this, because I think it's quite expensive to have such a translation. So this is the way we are dealing with this right now. So it's a little bit ad hoc. It's not some guidelines prescribed on this. We also try to, if possible, that farmers, that there are people or farmers that are speaking some English or understanding some English. So this helps. But yeah, I think it's a problem that a lot of European projects have. So
yeah, it's true. So there are some questions. Have you? We have a question from Kevin. Have you there be any surprise or unexpected findings from the initial validation processes?
So far, not yet. I think they're quite. I think it shows that the framework is quite complete. Actually, the questions that I showed are also a little bit where we want to dig deeper in, but not really very big surprises, I think, based on what we already know, for example, from the Nefertiti project and previous projects on networking. There are already quite a lot of European projects on networking and on demonstrations. So I think the results so far are quite similar, but I hope that in the IPM Works project we can dig a little bit deeper and make this closer link between, for example, this holistic approach and what exactly do you have to show, what exactly, how are all these different learning activities contributing to the learning process of a farmer. So there will be a PhD student working on this, Simon Locks, and he will try to make this link and make a longitudinal research on, he will follow some case studies, so a hub in close, and follow what's happening with the participants, how they are perceiving this. And so I hope I will can come back to you in 2 years with some more, or Simon will then at least, with some more information and hopefully surprises.
We have 2 more questions, one from Maria. You can read.
Yes, I understand that groups and networks are obviously used interchangeably, or is there a difference in the way the framework needs to be set up and applied? I think this is an interesting question, Maria. We set up the network in the project is called the relation or the link between the different hubs. And the hub is now called a group, but I think it's an interesting point if you have some literature or because the PhD student that will be working on this will be is very interested in this groups. This concept of a group and what a group can add to the learning process, but also what is the added value of having this group and the learning in this group. So I think it's a valuable point, and we will definitely have to take it into account if we go with it a little bit deeper into conceptualizing this framework and diversifying between the group and a network. So if you would have any interesting information or literature on this, I would be very interested in this. Then I see a question of John.
Okay, Maria answered that. She is curious. As learning groups is quite well researched, but with networks, to my knowledge, this is not the case.
Okay.
And the last question from John.
Yes, I wonder if you are tracking some measures of uptake and charge and change of practices uses so it can be followed up? Yes, indeed, there is in the project there is one work package that is really doing this in-depth monitoring of what the farmers are doing, so the farmers in the hub. So there are some quite extensive questionnaires on the practices that the IPM practices that they are implementing, also the use of their pesticide use, but also on their changes in how they think about IPM. So not only, because this is also something that we're still searching for, so this link between learning and adoption, because it's not because you didn't adopt anything that you didn't learn. Sometimes you could have learned that it's not something for you to do or not an interesting practice for you to implement. So this is still a little bit where we are searching and thinking which theories we can use for this learning and adoption link. But indeed, this will be tracked and used also in our evaluation, also of the in-depth case studies.
Okay, thank you, Laura, for your presentation, for your further explanation. We now we can move on, and let's turn now to Kristin Davis, who picks up the topic of human capital development from the perspective of investment. And the paper is entitled Investing in Farmer Capacities, Finding from a Global Case Study Approach. So I invite Kristin to open the microphone and give a very short presentation of herself and the co-authors of the paper.
Thank you, Patrizia, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm presenting this study on behalf of my co-authors. Some of them are in the rest of the chat, so I'll let them start to answer questions. John Pricing is here, and Johanna, Rachel Gilbert, and Shyamalani are also co-authors from this study, which was really a partnership between the FAO Investment Center and the International Food Policy Research Institute, looking at the issue of farmers' capacities and how to invest better in them. So by way of kicking us off, as you are well aware, there's a lot of challenges that we face in agriculture today. We have, besides COVID-19, there's climate change issues, we have globalization, there's a lot of disruptors going on within agriculture, digital technologies, food safety standards. And human capital in all of this is one of the really critical elements to face these disruptions and to face the future challenges that we have. So we decided to do this study to look at how can we better invest in human capital in agriculture, with a view to really providing recommendations and information that will help investors, whether they be international financing institutions, bilateral donors, governments, the private sector, and also the many NGO programs that also invest. So we really wanted to do this to look at human capital specifically and human capital within agriculture. And we define human capital operationally for the study as the skills and capabilities of small-scale agricultural producers to successfully manage their farming practices, and looking at their functional skills as well as the technical skills, plus business and managerial skills. So we'll mention and touch on all of those. By way of methodology, we first undertook literature review and review of data sets. So we looked at a lot of secondary data, and then when we got into our case study approach, we included 9 different case studies around the world. We also collected primary data directly from farmers and extension staff, but almost all in a virtual manner because of the COVID crisis that was going on. So we conducted virtual interviews, virtual focus groups, and there were also some online surveys and other means of data collection. We used a really iterative engagement process in that we went back and forth with the global community. We had a group of experts who advised us, helped us to select criteria for the promising case studies that we looked at. And they also fed back on our research findings and on the different promising cases. We held a number of global webinars and got feedback from the international community. And then in addition to the 9 case studies that we included in the study, there were a number of promising cases that weren't that we didn't collect an in-depth case study on, but that we included in the full report as a way of showing other places or other types of human capital that were interesting, but we didn't do the full case study on it. The first thing that we did was to develop a typology of agriculture human capital investment models. So we looked at adult and youth learners, and we said, okay, there's a lot of formal methods of developing human capital through the agricultural education system and agricultural universities and certification programs. There's also the non-formal, which is your traditional extension service, especially by public sector, but also private sector providers, the extension programs, which reach out to individuals and groups. There's also certification, which is more non-formal. It's not leading to anything like a degree. And then, of course, there's your on-the-job training and apprenticeships under the non-formal program. But we also included a lot of really informal sort of ad hoc or types of developing human capital that were just, not very formal at all. So farmer to farmer learning, things through the media, just a person's experience, and also coaching as well. We selected, as I said, 9 different case studies to look at. There were investment projects by different entities. Some of them were by the International Fund for Agricultural Development, the World Bank, some government ones, and others in these countries, in Cameroon, Chile, Cote d'Ivoire, India, Indonesia, Kenya, Peru, Rwanda, and the United States. These reports are just becoming available. We're in the final stages of formatting them. So there'll be the 9 case studies plus a global report coming out in the coming weeks and months. One of the things that we looked at was trends over time in investment finance, in human capital, in agriculture. We also looked at the thematic trends, but due to time, I thought I only had 10 minutes to present when we prepared this presentation. I'm presenting the status of development finance globally. There's about $1 trillion, but only 4.3% of that goes into agriculture, forestry, and fishing, as defined by the OECD data set that we were using. Out of the agriculture financing, only a very small amount goes into agricultural education and training and into agricultural extension. So we can really see that it's not prioritized. I mean, agriculture gets investment, but then within agriculture, there's many other things that are invested in besides extension and education. However, it's difficult sometimes to tease this out. How do they define education or extension or skills development or farmer learning? Sometimes it's a subcomponent of another program. So we present these findings with a little bit of uncertainty as to whether we're missing something, but this is what we found through searching these international data sets. Our theory of change was really to look at these models of human capital investment, whether they be farmer field schools or apprenticeships or workshops or training. How do they generate human capital, the skills, the technical skills, the functional skills, and also your managerial and business skills? And then that, of course, brings out results. What are the results of the human capital generated? These are the impacts, whether it's increased productivity, higher incomes, and so forth. But what we're really focusing on is that first link, the output or the farmer field school training, the activity, and the outcome that it leads to, the human capital that's invested in. The question that we asked was, what makes this agriculture human capital investment model successful in developing human capital? And so we looked at the different elements of what made it successful. One of them was that it used appropriate methods for the target group. So whether you're trying to target women, or you're trying to target farmers in the Andes, or you're trying to target youth in a certain area, you've got to use the appropriate methods for that target group, whether it's based on social capital or whether it's one-on-one learning or so forth. So it's really important to target your method to the group that you're trying to reach. Secondly is ownership. Some of the models, for instance, use the self-determination theory, which recognizes that having people's motivation really increases the likelihood of continuing the implementation of a model after the investment part of it is over. Thirdly, we also found that learning incentives were really important. So we saw that the programs that were more successful incentivized the learning based on the farmer realities. So farmers didn't necessarily maybe want to raise their skills on a certain area, but they found that if they had these marketing skills, they were going to gain more income. That provides an incentive for them. So showing them that they can get these opportunities based on their human capital was really important for incentivizing them, motivating them to gain the skills. And then lastly, integration. So it's not enough just to increase farmers' skills without something to do for it. So they have to have those skills, but then they also need to have a market, right? Or they need to have the skills and they need to know how to value add to their product and so forth. So the more successful programs had integration of value chains, marketing, other things like clean sanitation in the home and so forth were all really important areas in terms of integrating the successful projects. What we saw in terms of the outcomes, the human capital, remember, and the impacts, the results of that human capital generated. In the 9 cases, plus these different boxes, there are about 11 boxes that we looked at, we saw that the investment program led to technical agricultural skills, whether it's good agricultural practices, post-harvest handling, things like seeding and pruning, composting and harvesting. We saw, for instance, in the Indonesia case of farmer field schools, this happened as a result of the program that was investing in the human capital. We also saw farmers increasing in the complementary functional skills, social skills, even the empowered mindsets and attitudes. We saw greater communication, leadership, critical thinking, decision-making. One of the participants who was interviewed in the US said that they learned, how to speak in public and their professionalism through this program in the United States in Mississippi. We saw also the human capital development in terms of farming as a business. So farmers were gaining managerial, entrepreneurial skills, market skills. In Cameroon, young vocational training participants were really getting the skills to integrate them into society and also into markets and businesses. And then we saw the results of that human capital. Impacts such as increased incomes, improved yields, improved livelihoods. We saw the inclusion of women and youth into, for instance, honey production in Kenya or market gardening in Brazil. And then we saw the development of social capital and social inclusion. And we include this because it's the result of the human capital, right? The human capital led to increased social capital and improved social cohesion, whether it was in the home. We saw that in Kenya, that there was greater working together between a husband and wife team in their market enterprise that they had. In Rwanda, we saw the farmer field schools. The participants were really getting a lot of social cohesion there. So those were some of the outcomes and impacts that we saw. Just in terms of what does this mean, we do provide a number of conclusions in the paper, especially for the target audience of international financing institutions and other investors such as governments or bilateral donors. But as you saw from that diagram at the very beginning, we need to invest more. There's not enough investment in agriculture human capital, especially for the small scale producers, the fisher folk, the farmers, the livestock producers. So we need more investment in these types of programs. Another conclusion or recommendation that we give is that we need to partner for greater impact. This was a really key element as well in terms of the more successful programs. They brought in the market people, they brought in all the elements of the value chains, they brought in the right partners to achieve greater impact and to be able to scale. When you're partnering, you also must think about the existing policy environment. So the policy environment helps you. It provides that enabling environment of partnering better, of marketing, of maybe digital infrastructure and things like that. It's all affected by the policy environment. So it's important to have that right policy environment too, to the extent that you can affect it. And then thirdly, using the right delivery methods. Digital tools, of course, were very important to amplify the investment, but they have to be used with care. There's some people that might not have access to digital tools. They might not have the right infrastructure. And so we don't want to leave people out by using digital tools, but they do provide a lot of promise and a lot of ways to amplify the work that you're doing. Then you want to also reinforce these technical and functional skills by providing, links to market and things like that. And also by providing, complementary skills such as, the ability to speak in public and things related to empowerment and so forth. You also want to ensure inclusion, and of course, program design should take into account the social factors, the cultural factors, gender factors, economic factors that are going to affect participation in a program, that are going to affect the learning by the farmers and the others who are involved in the program. As I mentioned earlier, incentives and motivation for participation are really important. So you want to provide people with, the right incentives. So they're going to get a link to market through your program. They're not going to just get skills and then sit there. They're going to have opportunities as well as the skills. And then lastly, being a researcher, we saw, tons of opportunities for further research on agricultural human capital investment. We need to know, how does it work with private sector development models? How do we include more of the social, the human, the environmental impacts into the studies? And there's a lot more learning that can be achieved on human capital development in general. As I said at the beginning, we really need agricultural human capital, especially by producers who, make up a lot of the people that are developing the food and getting it to market and value adding and so forth. We need it more than ever to produce food sustainably for the future. What this study has done is to increase the knowledge base on human capital development, bring in some empirical evidence, and then also guiding the future research. The typology that we put together also contributes to the theory on development of human capital, and we hope that the study really adds value through applying this typology across the 9 different cases, the different box studies that we included. And then, of course, from a methodological perspective as well, we did gain some important learnings on conducting field research in a virtual manner through the COVID-19 regulations. So it was a really big study. We're still going on this year in terms of getting the outputs out there, and we'll certainly keep you informed about that. So with that, I'd like to pass back to our chair, Patrizia, and welcome a discussion now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Kristin, for your very interesting presentation. We have 2 further comments from your co-author, John. I don't know if you want to comment that for all the people to make further explanation about these 2 comments. If we can go to the question, what do you prefer?
To comment on John's comments?
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we did set this up to present in 10 minutes. So yeah, there's a rich amount of information out there, but certainly, we could give a whole presentation on just each of the 9 case studies and even the other boxes, but certainly most of the at least half of the studies were public, private, or government involved with the private sector, with other actors like NGOs and so forth. So I think it was really important, the areas that brought in the private sector, such as in Cameroon. In Chile, we saw an important alliance between the government and market bodies who were, interested to build the skills of farmers and so forth. So it was really important to bring in the private sector. It happened in Indonesia as well with our cocoa farmers in the farmer field schools. So that was an important element that is discussed further in the full paper.
Okay, thank you. I have just a question. Why you said that there are few investment in human capital in agriculture? So why do you think so little money is invested in human capital development in agriculture? Is it a problem of investment, or rather is of making good programs addressing real need of farmers?
Great question, Patrizia. I think it's a combination. I mean, I think there might be more investment that we know of, and it's just not seen as that. It's, if you do a search, you have to search education, extension, skills, capacity, human capital. There's so many terms that people use, and it's not the high level goal, right? Your goal is to improve livelihoods or to increase incomes. And you're going to do that via building the skills. So building the skills is just a means to an end, right? The other issue that we found is that it's really difficult, as you all know in extension and education, to measure what's the impact of a program, because, extension programs are so multifaceted. It's really difficult to attribute impacts directly to an extension program or to an education program. So we actually had a paper developed simultaneously last year on the economic evaluation of human capital investment in agriculture, because it is really an important factor, and people are not clear how to do it yet. The other issue in terms of, getting support from policymakers and things like that is that you invest in human capital today, but you're going to see the outcome and the results, a little bit later, especially when you're thinking of primary level education, educating children. That's the foundation for later development of human capital, right? And the payoff is so long in the future that people are, not so interested to do it, because you're not going to see an instant, impact.
Okay, thank you very much. There are two questions. One from Ismail. If I don't know, Ismail wonders if. Okay, you can read.
Okay, how to increase investment in human capital where there's a public interest. I mean, I think again, similar to extension programs and so forth, we need to get public policies in there to protect, things like natural resource management or protection of a watershed and this kind of thing. So I think there we need to really target, governments and others that have, the sort of mandate to cover those sorts of public sector, areas that need to be covered. Yeah, I think that's the rest of his question.
Yes, there is another question from Maria.
Okay, I think it would be nice to see exactly the different combination of actors to demonstrate how the different criteria could be fulfilled. Yeah, I mean, the paper itself goes into a lot of details. We first, talk about the case, who's the target audience, what methods were used, what were the results, and, what did we see? And then we summarize that, after, and we tried to make a section on what makes the case successful, and then what were the results of the human capital built. And this is where further research needs to come in to say, okay, so if I want to build the human capital of women livestock producers, is the method that we saw the best way, or is there another way that we should do it? Should we use farmer field schools, or should we use, some other sort of method? So certainly, teasing out what works best for what target group and that sort of thing would be really important. Okay.
Just to finish with Maria, the discussion about the human capital and increased investment exists since decades. Did anything change?
Well, we did look just over the past few years, really, to see, what are the trends and what have the investments been. We looked around from 2015 to 2018 in terms of the investment. So certainly, I don't think a whole lot is changing on the input side. What's changing is probably the urgency of the problem, and that, to think about sustainable food systems and, to protect the climate or to protect the environment and deal with climate change and things like that, human capital is really a key factor in dealing with all of that. If we're looking into the future, the knowledge that people have are really, really important in terms of dealing with the challenges that we have today. So I think, what has changed is really the urgency of the issue and thinking about the sustainable development goals and things like that, is that, we're trying to get there. We also looked, we didn't have time to present, but we looked a bit about trends, where are people investing in human capital development and things like that. And we saw, an increasing focus on youth. For instance, we saw that farmer field schools has really become institutionalized. It's not anything new anymore, but it's something that people are trying to now institutionalize into countries and into universities and so forth.
Okay, we have a question from Simon. What other incentives than market access did you found?
Okay, what other incentives besides market access that we found? I mean, I did mention there were some, let's say, social spin-offs, empowerment we saw. So for instance, the case in India, it was an interesting case because it was all women targeted. So they were working with community promoters who were backstopped by master trainers. And these people gained a real standing in their community, a sort of a respect, and just the personal empowerment that they gained was really, really important. So in addition to gaining all these, important technical skills of how to do castration or weigh your pigs or, take your goats to market, there were a lot of skills or even just empowerment and attitude issues that were also brought into the training to teach them how to work better in their community and so forth. So that became a real incentive as well. I don't know if my colleagues are adding anything in the box, but there could be some others as well.
Yes, John adds something in the box, but about Maria, about the change, new challenges and opportunities, but the model of improving people's skills is a standard approach.
Yeah. And I see Johanna has mentioned too, in the Cameroon case, that these young people who were doing vocational training, they didn't just get the skills in a training center, but they went out and applied those skills in a real life situation. And at the same time, they built these personal, social, and professional networks as they did their business, so that they gained, that whole sense of pride in what they're doing and the networks to continue the enterprise that they had started during their studies.
Then there is another remark. Right, in India, an improved recognition in their communities was also a big incentive for women participants. Okay.
Thanks, Johanna and John.
Thanks, everybody, for comments, for questions, and so on. And thank you, Kristin, for your interesting presentation and for your further explanations. We now turn to Nevena Alexandrova-Stefanova. I hope the pronunciation is correct, Nevena, sorry, who introduced us to the development of an advisory system that can effectively support the development of human capital and innovation in Azerbaijan. The paper is entitled Supporting Agricultural Innovation, a country model for reforming the agricultural advisory system in Azerbaijan. So I invite Nevena to open the microphone and give us a very short presentation of herself and the co-authors of the paper.
Thank you very much, Patrizia. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. The complex challenges that affect the food systems today call for an immediate action, and they also call for accelerating the pace and scaling up the innovations. And those innovations needs to be supported. And the government of Azerbaijan, FAO, and the donor European Union, luckily are on the same opinion. So I'm going to present today a country model for reforming the agriculture advisory services in Azerbaijan. That is done in a collaboration with several national and also international team players. Some of them are listed here: Jahan Kurbanova, Vugar Bashirov, Elmadin Namazov. But I would like to also say that this is a work in progress in a framework of a project that, and today we have a much larger team of international and national players that are enlarging the scope and impact of this project. So I'm going to take you to a trip to Azerbaijan, still virtual. I have, though, an issue changing my slides. I hope this will soon be resolved. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes,
no,
Nevena.
I cannot. Unfortunately,
yes,
I cannot move my.
We can see.
You see, but I cannot move the slides up. Okay, now it should be fine. So Azerbaijan is a very interesting country. It's a mid-income country at the South Caucasus, at the border of the Caspian Sea, with a population of 10 million people, and the economy is oil-based economy so far, but with a good agriculture potential. Unfortunately, there are rural-urban socioeconomic disparities that are quite significant. You have probably seen Azerbaijan being mentioned in recently as a host of the Euro Championship events, but also Formula One events. It does have a great potential in agriculture. However, only 5% of the total GDP of the country is related to agriculture sector, despite its good potential. In addition, it is a significant sector in Azerbaijan because it's responsible for the employment of 37% of the population and in agriculture sector, of which around 56% are women. Besides that, Azerbaijan is a rejuvenating nation, and with a lot of young people living in the rural areas that are trying to find a decent employment. Advisory services can be part of the solution. And this is definitely recognized by the government of Azerbaijan and also donors like European Union. The government has certain policies like the Azerbaijan 2020 outlook for the future, where they are targeting eco-friendly agriculture, modern technologies, and trained farmers. Obviously, this can be achieved only with a strong agricultural advisory services and capacity. They have a specific goal point 5.3 on their strategic roadmap that is targeting agricultural advisory services as a network and system. They would like to improve the financial mechanisms and also overall capacities in order to have modern public agriculture advisory services, understood like knowledge broker, innovation facilitator, inclusive, sustainability oriented, digitally enabled, food system supportive, and also engaged in policy making. Of course, this poses a challenge in the development actors to try to advise the government to create a reform model that is best fit to Azeri conditions. What is an agricultural advisory service model? It's a complex ecosystem of country assets, institutions, capacities, culture, religion, financing, knowledge exchange, innovation facilitation, farmers and policymakers engagement, and many others that makes the delivery of the agricultural advisory services and the reform effective, efficient, relevant, and inclusive. So obviously, there are good models existing around the world. However, copying and pasting a model mechanically without having the knowledge of the country assets and institution and their capacities will not be very productive. So therefore, we had applied the following methodology. We had studied thoroughly the agricultural advisory system in the country through an FAO methodology, very comprehensive one. We have made SWOT analysis in participatory mode. We have studied good practices and also did a benchmarking study on the successful practices around the world, in particularly in the European Union, and also did this design, this architecture of the model with several mechanisms in a co-constructive way. So with a series of roundtables, webinars, bilateral discussions and focus group discussions with the national stakeholders and the project Agricultural Advisory Service Board, or as we also call it, project working group. What is the project? The project that we have together with the European Union and the EU delegation and in Azerbaijan is about strengthening these advisory services. It is interfering at policy level, but also at operational level. The first two results are more related to policies and strategies, and the results 3, 4, and 5 refer how to operationalize the model, how to implement strategies, what capacities, human capital needs to be strengthened, upgrade, and how to bring institutions and actors together in order to innovate. So we have several products, the good practices assessment, the model, which is the architecture, as I said, that would provide further the mechanisms and operational modus of the policies and interactions with the actors, strategy. All those are done at national level. We also have, that's the beauty of having a project. So beyond the analytical ideas, you can actually implement them and see what is working, what is not. So we have regional activities. We did the regional mapping, as we believe that advisory services have to be context specific. They have to serve the concrete reality in different regions. In order to boost the innovation process, we need to attract different stakeholders with different types of expertise. And this is also, we also work at local level or district level to facilitate local innovations and partnerships, and also capacities of farmers, while the capacities of advisors are a cross-cutting topic that we implement throughout the project. Here you can see how it looked like, the agriculture advisory services system when we started in the beginning. Despite there are some linkages mentioned here, there's a more hierarchical relationships rather than showing any interaction. And you can see that it's highly fragmented. Fragmented in terms of when we take into account the agriculture innovation system, that is how we call ACES outside of European Union. So the research actors are not interacting, although research in Azerbaijan, agriculture research, is quite improved, and it has something to offer to national stakeholders, to farmers, but still it is not there because of missing interactions with extension services and other actors. But it's also private sector, public sector fragmentation, including in advisory services, service providers. They're all isolated, and even in public sector, there are competition between different agencies that are tackling different aspects of the advisory services systems. Here you can see some of the findings of the assessment that we did, and it does say that there are actors, but there is no system of agriculture advisory services. Lack of interactions and strong domination by public agriculture advisors, which consists of 77% of all service providers for advisory services. That's an interesting situation. Actually, 10 years ago, the situation was quite different. There was an attempt to rely on private advisory entirely through a project brought by a World Bank for 10 years long project that aimed at generating a lot of private sector actors like non-governmental organizations, and gradually increase the paid service. But unfortunately, this didn't happen. And fortunately, the government recognized the need of public sector intervention. So they are now dominating the advisory services. But let's see who the private sector advisory service providers are. So we have the training and consulting organizations that are basically input suppliers. We have 34% fellow farmers, and this is a significant figure, and that we need to take into account also individual extension experts and very minimal producer organization, farmer groups, non-governmental and civil society organizations. It's an interesting observation indeed. There is a great confusion in the public agencies that have the mandate to deliver advisory services about their role and how they can interact. No coordination mechanisms, as you can imagine, lack of capacities of advisors, and particularly in social interactions, in marketing and value chains, so food systems are not well covered. Weather information and services for rural women and youth are missing. And there is no monitoring and evaluation system, and no policy at the moment, nor any regulatory framework for advisory services. So based on that, we have developed certain transformation goals for agriculture advisory system in Azerbaijan. That is to develop strong governance, integration, coordination at system level, against the background of agriculture innovation system, to optimize the funding for the whole system, to empower the system to facilitate innovations and to increase access, availability, and relevance to the information services and innovation to all farmers, to enhance the capacities of the actors, and also establish quality assurance mechanism that is missing at the moment, establish monitoring and evaluation system, and also increase the outreach and communication. So at national level, this is how the model is trying to addressing the gaps but also opportunities. National level modality, it's about leadership, about governance, policy, regulatory framework, and investment. So that's part of the module you can think of like the brain of the agriculture advisory services system. So the brain, I have listed here on the slide the new elements that are being introduced to the system. And there are a lot, because this is exactly where intervention had to be designed. One is the pluralistic council. This is a council for stakeholders for agricultural advisory services, composed by different type of stakeholders. You have NGOs, different public agencies, you have private sector, and so on. We thought it's very important to let the government know that there is a need for knowledge, national knowledge center, or you can imagine this as a function, not as a real structure at the moment, because it can take various forms. But the functions are that it has to promote the new and advanced knowledge, to provide methodological support, and also to define the curricula of the trainings. For the moment, the agriculture advisory system in Azerbaijan is providing only trainings to farmers, but the training program is top-down and not related to the needs of the farmers. So this needs to change. Also, the national level should take care about the impartiality of the advice, and here, taking into account the fact that we have many, although not really recognized players like farmers and private sector import suppliers, a code of conduct for advisors and village agents is to be developed, together with a quality assurance system and national online platform that can have many functions. One of them is governance, another is monitoring and evaluation, and also can serve the regulatory framework for quality assurance as well. National annual forum is also recommended. It's going to be piloted in the frame of our project, and also innovation fund as a mechanism to at national level to ensure resource mobilization and balanced funding. At regional level, what we have here, that's about the relevance and the context and the partnerships and the brokerage. We have 2 pilot regions and 1 focus region, and what is really new here, except of mirroring certain activities and mechanisms at national level, like regional strategy development, regional groups that are going to discuss the programs. Here we also have a brokerage center, again, not as a structure, but as a function that can be hosted by different institutions to provide innovation support, to act as resource mobilization at the regional level for communication and also training, certification, monitoring and evaluation, and so on. And the local level, we are piloting local interactive innovation through innovation platforms that are quite similar to operational groups. In terms of coordination, there is a district one-stop shop and village agents that you can think of differently of the agricultural advisory agents as young people who are interested and engaged at community level to provide information, not necessarily being knowledgeable on agriculture extension, but who can link other people and organizations and ultimately serve the farmers. So how this can work in terms of governance and coordination, and I limited my talk to certain aspects of and mechanisms of the model only for the purpose of this session. As you see, there are a lot of interaction between different institutions, different bodies, and this is exactly what we wanted to do to stimulate different interactions. Quality assurance, knowledge dissemination, and you see plenty of interactions, putting agencies, institutions, actors into a collaborative effort and trying to co-create innovation. That is also very important. So what is next? We need to define the clear roles and responsibilities to the key actors of the system. That's the role of the government. So far, they are still experimenting, and they are transferring key roles and leading responsibilities to different agencies, which creates a little bit an environment of unpredictability, but we hope with the project intervention this will be settled. What is very important is to be able to institutionalize the coordination mechanisms, and this we really work hard together with different other projects in synergies with projects that for bilateral donors or European Union or FAO funded projects, and particularly with the working group in the Ministry of Agriculture that is developing the draft law for advisory services. We pilot almost all mechanisms at regional and local level, so that we provide the government with a choice to see what is working well, what probably is not working very well in the conditions. We develop capacities, and as I said, at policy, institutional, and also personal level. We create incentives for the private sector to penetrate the agricultural advisory services system, especially those actors that are emerging or not typical. For instance, the digital extension actors, women groups, youth groups, and also very importantly, as I said, the old model, development model of creating an NGO of a missing service and then trying to ensure its sustainability is probably not working well. So what we are now doing, we are intervening at the level of the whole system And instead of creating an NGO that would be providing services, we are bringing the existing knowledge into cooperation through public-private partnerships, for instance, or other forms of collaboration like innovation platforms embedded in regional policies and also national policies. And we're also helping the country to establish monitoring and evaluation system along the works of FAO on agriculture innovation system and agriculture extension and advisory services. There will be 2 presentations by my colleagues on that frameworks and facilitate the interactive innovation, again, with a partnership in cooperation with partners from European Union. So I'm finishing my talk with several key take-home messages. One that is very important, that importing standardized models of extension to a new context is not a promising strategy. We need to consider the pluralistic advisory service as a system in order to bring innovations, to bring more innovation and scale them up fast. We also need to build on existing structures, on existing functionalities, and stimulate interactions that make the model unique and context fit and also cost efficient. It has to be collectively designed and nationally owned, because this is the only way that the system will feel engaged and feel responsible and accountable. But it's also important to provide multiple functionalities, levels, and mixed approaches, at least in the beginning of a design of such methodologies that bring interactive innovation, public-private partnerships, and community engagement. But those are still challenging ideas to bring forward. That's why capacity development and also participatory processes are very important, together with the strong political will, synergies, and incentives that has to be built in extension policies, investment, and regulatory systems. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nevena, for your presentation. You have a big job to do. Are there any barriers to overcome in terms of facilitating integrating this sector, and which is the sustainability of the project in the future?
Well, there are many barriers, of course. First of all, the model that we presented to the government and all stakeholders is having many modern ideas. Those ideas need to be internalized, and capacities needs to be built in order that the stakeholders to create a sufficient mass of experts who can understand the benefit of the system level interventions. There are also challenges like creating public-private partnerships. There are such questions, but there will be public-private partnerships, but who is providing the money in a public-private partnership? Obviously, that's not the idea of the partnership. In the agriculture innovation platforms or operational groups, who is the institution that is leading? These things, still need to be well rooted in the mindset. It takes time, but it also need to start from it. And again, as I said, sustainability is ensured through cooperation with other stakeholders, with other projects. For instance, we cooperate with a project on subsidies schemes, and that is very important for advisory system as well. And this is the way we believe we should go forward.
Okay, there is a question from Kevin. Thanks, Nevena. This seems like a fascinating case study of institution building in its broad sense. While creating hard institution is one element, what do you see as the critical soft institution, mindset, norms, convention that need to be changed? Is it possible to prioritize them in any way? Are there easy wins?
Thank you, Kevin, for this question. Yes, we always try not to emphasize on the hard institution, on the structures, but on the functions, because the functions can be shared. There are more flexible arrangements that could be done. And the change of mindset, however, is the most difficult thing to do. We know this from the market commercialization experiences, not in agriculture advisory services though. But we have to be to follow a consistent process and provide consistent messages and build capacities, build human capital in order to continue. The only way is to demonstrate, to be able to demonstrate the benefits of the system level intervention. There are ways, but it requires a lot of advocacy as well. And also, it's exactly for that we need a strong national participatory process when we develop system level interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nevena, for your further explanation. I would like to invite all the three presenters on the stage for the final greetings. I think there are 3 minutes left. I don't know if you have some question for each other. There is, okay, there is. Lisa Van Dijk says there has been a very interesting project on this called CDA's Capacity Development for ACE. And
yes, indeed, it's a project that FAO participated together with AgriNatura. Now, again, funded by European Union, FAO has another project under the framework of the ESEE. That is kind of a continuation of CDA's project, still on capacities, but more on policy level in 9 countries in different regions, Latin America, Asia, and Africa. So we continue and we apply similar approaches actually and methodologies like the one that I described. Thank you, Lisa.
And Ismail asked if there is, what is the number of public extension agents in Azerbaijan and what is the rate of the extension agents to farmers? Well, there are a few public institutions, basically 4 big ones, together with the university, agricultural service agency, that is more on plant protection livestock, but also agricultural science and innovation center, and also agricultural research center that are engaged in agricultural advisory services, and they have, some of them have regional hubs. We in FAO are not big fans on the extension to farmer ratio. And because with the digital services, for instance, you can reach much more people, and then
as you have seen, we have a lot of farmer-to-farmer extension that cannot be captured by this ratio. This is why we also develop a specific framework for monitoring and evaluation, and it will be presented further in the conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know that there was another question in the backstage, but I think I don't know if there is any more time for this question. I don't know, if Kristin, if you want to make your question from Laura.
I can, thanks. Yeah, Laura, I was just wondering about sort of the theoretical underpinnings that you were using for the analytical framework that you developed.
Yeah, well, it was hard to find some theoretical underpinnings for the learning environment. I searched in the literature, and I came across with this concept based on of this idea from educational science, where they said, oh, there are some, we want to not to use this classroom name anymore, but if then you search for definitions on learning environment, it's very hard to find a suitable definition. So I only found this UNESCO definition that is so broad, and then I used the other theories on peer-to-peer learning, on learning networks, to further deepen or expand these 4 elements that were mentioned in the UNESCO report. So I was quite surprised. I thought it was it would be an easy thing to do, because you would think that in education there is something like an easy definition of something like a learning environment, but apparently it was not. So I was quite surprised myself. But we have a pedagogue in our team, and she also said, oh, it would be interesting to use this concept, because it's much more broader than just focusing on one event, one time. We really want this longitudinal perspective taking in. But we're still searching ourselves to really further conceptualize this. So if you have some information yourself on this, I would be very happy.
Great. So we are on time. Thank you. Thank you, Laura, Nevena, and Kristin for your presentation. Thank you for all the people who attended this session. And there will be another section in maybe 10 minutes. So bye-bye. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.